A Jealous God, Part 1. Remember that God knew of Lucifer's rebellion and of the war in heaven from the beginning, yet he still created beings with free choice, free will, free to choose to love God and believe Him or not. Yet God still determined to carry out His plan of sharing the love of God, the love that existed always between the Father and the Son. God and Jesus covenanted that they would still create beings with free will upon whom they could shed their love. They did this because free will is necessary for created beings with moral powers to truly return their love to God willingly, because they have an intelligent appreciation of His character. It is true that God's plan carried great risk. Think of the angels who made an insurrection in heaven. But God's purposes of love are so high, and His thoughts to show the grace of God to humanity are so unspeakably wonderful, that God and Jesus Christ know that it is worth all of the terrible things we all have to endure so that God might win us, even while retaining our free will in eternity to come. But in the future, no one will ever choose to sin, to disobey God ever again. So remember, always remember that God's desire is that we, as many people as possible, would choose to believe God and become His children. But even more than this, that we would accept God's proposal to be married to Him. This is the ultimate goal. This is what all of the powers of heaven are working to bring about, that we may be made one with God. Consider this. To many, many people, it is a great mystery that a loving God would allow the sin of Lucifer to run its course, in order to show all of the intelligent creatures who, in the beginning, could not understand the true nature of disobedience to God and what must be the sure results of sin. Even though God always has a purpose of love in all the things that He ordains or allows, yet often God's ways seem dark and mysterious to us. Often we cannot comprehend His reason for many things He allows to happen in our lives. But we must trust. We must know that God is working to bring all things to this expected end. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. In God's purpose, His greatest desire is that we accept His covenant promise to be married to us. Therefore, His plan includes preparing us for this wonderful purpose. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible teaches us that God, by Jesus Christ, created all things upon the earth, perfect, in 6 literal days. After preparing the earth, its ecosystems, plant life, and all the animals, then Jesus Christ created humans, man and woman, on day 6. The man God called Adam. Then God made a woman who He called Eve to be His helpmeet, to be Adam's companion. On this day, Jesus brought the woman to the man, and they were married. On this day, God gave to Adam and Eve dominion over all the earth that He had just created. They were the king and queen of the earth, to have dominion, to rule under the order and principles of God. Then, on the 7th day, God looked upon all that He had made and pronounced it very good. He beheld the first man and woman whom He had created, and God delighted in His work of beauty and perfection. God delighted that He had made man. The Bible says that God rested on the seventh day and blessed it and sanctified the seventh day because he was so happy to see this important step in his great plan fulfilled. But this was the very world, the very planet to which God had banished Satan and his fallen angels, the very place that God had made perfect. Among the new race of creatures that God had promised his son Jesus would become one of them and to remain one of them forever. In this very place, God allowed Satan to dwell and to work his deceptive arts in this place. God warned Adam and Eve about the fallen angel Satan. And God also chose to give the man and the woman a few simple commandments in one strong prohibition. See, God had made a beautiful garden in the midst of the new world he had made. It was called the Garden of Eden, and here God placed the man and woman. This was to be their home. God gave instructions that Adam and Eve were to keep the garden and dress it, which is to attend to it and work in it. That was delightful work. They were to train the wonderful plants and direct where they should grow. Adam and Eve were to excel in science and skill of naturalists and as spiritual landscape artists. Also, God had provided many wonderful trees which grew all manner of fruit, and from these, God said they could eat freely of the fruit. Among these trees, which they could eat freely from, one was a very special tree which God called the tree of life. The fruit of this tree would perpetuate eternal life. But God also informed Adam and Eve that there was another special tree in the middle of the garden, from which he prohibited them to eat from. God commanded Adam and Eve not to eat the fruit of this tree, which he called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God warned them that if they should eat from this tree, in the day that they eat from it, that they would surely die. You see, it was in this tree that God would allow Satan to dwell. God would not permit Satan to follow Adam and Eve around the garden to harass them and try to tempt them to sin. But only at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil could Satan interact with Adam and Eve if they should choose to come near the tree. So it happened on a day that Satan had chosen to disguise himself as a beautiful and beguiling serpent. And he waited there in the tree, if perhaps Adam or Eve may come by. Then one day Eve ventured away from Adam, and she saw the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and she wondered why God had forbidden them from eating from this beautiful tree. Then she heard Satan speaking to her, and she looked, but she only saw a really dazzling and intriguing serpent. She knew not that it was the enemy of God and man that Jesus had warned them about. Satan spoke, and he lied to the woman. He said that God had forbidden them from eating from this tree because it was a tree which could open their eyes and make whoever eats it wise to know good and evil, and that it would make them to be like God. This was very interesting that Satan was attempting to put his own thoughts and desires into the woman's mind, just as he did with the angels in heaven who he deceived. Satan tried to inspire her to seek to be like God, to become dissatisfied with the blessings God had given her, and to covet what seemed to be greater things which God had not given, even to try to be in God's place. Terrible still to understand is that although God made Adam and Eve perfect with perfect natures, Eve still chose to exercise her free will to believe what the serpent said over what Jesus, her loving Creator, had told her. She believed the serpent, that God was withholding something good from her, instead of believing the truth that God had and would freely give her all good things, and more to be revealed in His time. But Satan's lie carried with it the impression of receiving greater things now, when we choose, and not trusting God and waiting on His timing. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So now Satan tempted Adam and Eve, and they fell for his devices. Satan caused sin and disobedience to enter into the new world which God had made perfect. Just as God had warned Adam and Eve, now death had entered into the new world. If it were not for the everlasting covenant, Adam and Eve would have immediately died. But Jesus in that very moment stepped between them and the pains of death, and in that moment taking the penalty of suffering upon Himself. Yet there was a death that could be seen and understood. God did clothe them with animal skins, because the beautiful light that surrounded them in their innocence, which hid their nakedness from view, had departed after they had sinned. Some animals had to be sacrificed for God to clothe Adam and Eve with these skins. And this became the first revelation to mankind of God's system of mercy through the substitutionary death of another. At this time, Satan now became the ruler of earth because Adam had betrayed his trust into the hands of the fallen angel Lucifer. But God would not forsake His children, Adam and Eve. Although God commanded that they must leave the beautiful Garden of Eden as part of their consequence, because they chose to believe Satan, they were sent out of the garden, but they left carrying the first promise that God had made to all mankind. And this was the first announcement of salvation from their terrible mistake. It was the revelation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. This was heard and understood by Adam and Eve in the words of God's judgment against the serpent who had deceived Eve. And God had said, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It, that is, the seed of the woman, shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. God said that He would work for man even though man had sinned against Him. It meant that He would give to every person born in this world the grace of God to resist evil if he would but choose. That is what is meant by the enmity God promised that He would put between the seed, or the offspring of the woman, and the offspring of Satan the serpent. God also gave to mankind the first details of the love He would show through His Son Jesus Christ, that He would come and become a human, the seed of the woman, and He would ultimately bruise or crush the serpent's head. Jesus would get the victory in the end and win back all that was lost. But this promise was also a prophecy that Satan would bruise Christ's heel in the process. It means the victory would come only by sacrifice and great pain, but Christ would even conquer death as part of God's great plan. Now the warfare of the great controversy between Christ and Satan would fully open in the theater in which the battles would be fought. Our little world, so small in God's vast universe, would become the center of all the attention of the wondering creation in the great beyond. Man was from that time to be subject to the constant attempts of Satan to work to destroy him, because man is the object of God's love and the focus of His great plan and God's ultimate desire. And God would demonstrate His great love to man and provide all the help man would need to cooperate with God and the angels in gaining the victory for the kingdom of heaven. But man must choose whose side he will be on, who he would trust and obey. Satan would use his lies and deceptive arts to try to cause man to distrust God, in whom is his only help. Satan would seek to cause man to think as God as unfair or as an unjust ruler, just as he did with the angels in heaven who believed Lucifer and followed him in rebellion. Lucifer was jealous of Christ in heaven. Lucifer's jealousy was born of selfishness and evil. His jealousy made him willing to destroy all things in order to gain his selfish desires, desires that were not for the good of others, but only for his personal exaltation. God is also jealous over his children whom he has created. God is jealous lest Satan should lead them astray and they be lost. God's jealousy is not selfish. His jealousy over us comes from his great desire that we should be his and that we should be truly happy and safe by choosing to trust and believe God, not the enemy who is only trying to destroy God's children. We shall see more clearly how God, in his love and jealousy for his children, that we should be his and that we should choose him and be happy and forever blessed, instead of the ways of destruction from Satan. We shall soon see more about how God has provided us with an abundance of good and powerful things to help us understand better who God is, and in preparing us to be his forever.